The storm rolled in quickly. Big Bird had just been walking along Sesame Street, humming a happy tune, when a gust of wind rattled the trash cans outside Hooper's store. Papers swirled in the air like frantic birds. The awning over the storefront flapped violently. Then the sky darkened. Not a gradual creeping dimness like dusk settling in, but an abrupt, unnatural shift. It was as if someone had pulled a curtain across the sun. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of damp pavement and something else, something sour and acrid, like burnt hair. Big Bird looked up, his beak opening slightly in confusion. He blinked his large, cartoonish eyes. "Gee, what's going on?" The air crackled. Then, with a rush of green smoke, she appeared. A shadow slithered across the brick wall before she fully materialized. The Wicked Witch of the West. The puppet characters weren't used to seeing real humans appear like this, emerging from nothing, stepping out of the darkness itself. Most of Sesame Street's guest stars arrived with smiles and songs. But this was different. She loomed over them, tall and impossibly thin, her black robes fluttering as if caught in a wind that no one else could feel. The wide brim of her hat cast deep shadows over her gaunt, sharp features. Her skin, it was too green, not the soft, slightly comical green of Kermit the Frog or Oscar the Grouch. No, her skin looked wrong, too real, like something alive and pulsing beneath. Under the studio lights, it shimmered oddly, shifting from a sickly yellow-green to something darker, murkier, as if it were constantly changing. She gripped a long, gnarled broomstick, her knuckles knotted like twisted roots. But it was not hers. Not yet. Her eyes flicked toward Big Bird, cold and calculating. "You?" she hissed, voice low and slithering like a snake through wet leaves. "You have something that belongs to me." Big Bird swallowed. His feathers ruffled slightly, an instinctive reaction of discomfort. He glanced down at the broomstick in his wing, suddenly aware of its weight. "Oh, you mean this? I found it earlier." He shuffled his massive feet. "I was just keeping it safe, you know." The witch's lips curled into something that might have been a smile, if smiles were meant to be cruel. "Well, aren't you just the little guardian?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Oscar, peering out of his garbage can, squinted at her. "Hey lady, what's with the dramatics? You lose your broom or something?" The witch's head snapped toward him so fast that even Oscar, who rarely cared about anything, flinched. Her smile vanished. "I did not lose it," she spat, her voice suddenly deep and guttural. "It was stolen." Lightning cracked somewhere, though there were no visible clouds. A low rumble shuddered through the set. Big Bird tightened his grip on the broom. "Well, maybe you can have it back if you say please." For a moment, the witch was still. Then, slowly, deliberately, she stepped forward. The tap-tap of her pointed boots echoed unnaturally, like hollow knocks on wood. Big Bird took an instinctive step back. The air around her was wrong, cold. It didn't match the warm studio lights. It felt hollow, like standing in a place where the world had been scraped away. The puppeteers, hidden beneath the set, shifted uncomfortably. The air inside the studio was heavy, charged with static electricity. A few swore they could hear a faint whispering beneath the dialogue, words spoken just below the threshold of understanding. Maria, standing off camera, furrowed her brow. She had been in hundreds of episodes, acted alongside dozens of guest stars. But something about this woman, this version of the Wicked Witch, felt different. Her hands clenched into fists. She didn't know why, but she suddenly wanted to tell Big Bird to run. But it was just a children's show, right? The episode continued. The witch, still eerily close to Big Bird, tilted her head. The long, gnarled fingers of one hand twitched slightly. "You don't want to make me angry, do you?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but it filled the entire set, curling into every corner. The puppets hesitated. Even Oscar. Big Bird gulped. "Well, I mean, no, but..." A sharp wind cut through Sesame Street, howling through the alleyway. Trash cans tipped over. A stack of newspapers lifted and scattered into the air. From the alley, the darkness moved. It was quick, So quick that none of the crew could be certain they had actually seen anything. Just a shifting something, like a shadow trying to form itself into a shape. In the playback, there was nothing. But those on set knew. The rest of the episode played out, on the surface at least, as planned. The witch, through a series of antics, was supposed to learn about kindness, but her presence lingered too long in each frame. During a scene with Grover, the little blue monster's voice wavered. He was a puppet, just fabric and foam, yet there was real fear in his tone. The W-witch lady, I think maybe you should. The camera cut suddenly. The audio had distorted, the static rising for a half second. In that brief moment, before the next scene resumed, someone in the control room swore they heard a whisper embedded in the white noise. A woman's voice. I see you. Later, when the episode aired, the reaction was immediate. Parents called in, furious. My daughter won't stop crying. She says the witch is watching her from the window. My son woke up screaming. He swears she was in his room. My television turned itself back on after the episode ended. It was just static, but I swear I heard laughing. PBS pulled the episode immediately. No reruns, no home releases. It never existed. But in 2022, a lost tape surfaced. The footage was digitized, but something was wrong with it. The colors were slightly off, like an old photograph exposed to too much sunlight. The final 2 minutes had never aired before. The witch turns, not to Big Bird. Not to Maria. Not to anyone on Sesame Street. She turns to the audience. You can't hide from me. The studio lights flicker. Her mouth stretches wider. A frame flashes, too fast for the eye to register. A still image. The wicked witch, grinning, her eyes black and empty, a hollow void swallowing her irises. Below, a single sentence, written in jagged, frantic letters, she never left. People who watched the recovered footage reported nightmares. Some swore they saw movement in the darkness of their rooms, a shadow in the doorway. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the television is off, a faint, crackling laughter can be heard, even when it's unplugged. Some things should stay lost. The VHS tape was never supposed to be found. It sat forgotten in the dark recesses of an old PBS storage facility, buried beneath obsolete broadcasting equipment and mountains of unlabeled dust-coated reels. The room smelled of old plastic and mildew, the air thick with the scent of forgotten media, of things once meant to be seen and heard, but long since abandoned. For decades, it had been hidden, undisturbed, until now. Alex had only been working at the station for a few weeks when he was assigned the mind-numbing task of cataloguing the old archives. It was a punishment of sorts. He had been caught browsing the internet during a live broadcast, and his supervisor, a grizzled man named Don, had not taken kindly to it. You want to waste time? Here's something to keep you busy, Don had grumbled, tossing him a clipboard. Get down to the basement and sort through the old tapes. Make a record of anything that might be worth preserving. The rest, toss 'em. The basement was exactly what Alex had expected, cold, dimly lit, and reeking of decay. Rows of rusting metal shelves lined the walls, each packed with dusty VHS tapes, some labeled, many not. It was dull work, but as he sifted through the tapes, something caught his eye. A black VHS slightly larger than the others. Unlike the neatly labeled tapes around it, this one had only a few words scrawled onto a peeling sticker. Barney and Friends Unaired episode. Alex frowned. He grew up in the 90s like most kids his age. He had watched Barney, though he'd never admit it to anyone now. But he had never heard of an unaired episode. Curiosity got the better of him. He wiped the dust from the casing and turned toward an old TV setup in the corner of the room. A bulky CRT television sat atop a rusting cart, a VHS player resting beneath it. He slid the tape inside and pressed play. The machine whirred. The screen flickered to life. The episode began just like any other Barney and Friends episode. The familiar, colorful playground set filled the screen, bathed in an artificial golden glow. The camera panned across the scene as children ran in from the sides, laughing and waving. Then, there he was, Barney. He appeared from behind a tree, as he always did, his movements exaggerated and bouncy. His bright purple skin contrasted against the green grass, his permanent frozen smile stretching wide. "Hi there, kids," Alex shivered. Something was off. The voice was familiar, but it echoed strangely, as if the audio had been layered multiple times. It sounded too deep, almost sluggish, like it had been slowed down slightly. The children responded with enthusiasm, their voices high-pitched and eager. But Alex noticed something strange about them too. Their smiles seemed too wide. Their movements were too synchronized, like they had rehearsed every step too many times. The longer he watched, the more unnatural it all felt. Then the theme song started. "I love you, you love me." But something was wrong. Halfway through, the audio glitched. The words stretched unnaturally, warping into a low, droning hum. The video wavered, distorting slightly as if the tape had degraded. Then, beneath the song, something else, a faint sound. Screaming. Alex froze. It was almost imperceptible, buried deep in the audio mix, but it was there, high-pitched, distant, like the echo of children crying. His stomach twisted. Was it just his imagination? Some kind of audio corruption from the age of the tape? Then the video flickered. For less than a second, the screen changed. The playground was empty now. The bright, cheerful colors had drained away, replaced with an eerie, muted palette. The once vivid green grass looked grey, the sky overcast and sickly yellow. Barney stood alone. His head was tilted to one side, his black plastic eyes reflecting nothing. Then the screen snapped back to normal. Alex's breath came in short, shallow bursts. His hands trembled. What the hell was this? The episode continued, but something had shifted. The children still played, but their voices now sounded hollow. Their movements had become slow, unnatural. One little girl, no older than 6, turned directly to the camera. Her mouth opened as if to speak. Then the audio cut out entirely. The silence was deafening. Alex's heartbeat pounded in his ears. Then, in that void of sound, a whisper crackled through the speakers. A voice, warped and static-laced. "He sees you." Alex recoiled, slamming his hand on the VHS player. The screen flickered violently. For a brief moment, Barney's face filled the frame. But it wasn't Barney. Not the one Alex remembered. The costume looked the same, but the expression had changed. The smile was wider now. Much wider. The edges of the mouth stretched beyond the limits of the costume. The teeth, Barney wasn't supposed to have teeth, were visible beneath the felt lips, sharp and jagged. His black, soulless eyes gleamed. Then, a shrill, ear-piercing scream burst through the speakers. Alex yanked the tape from the player, heart hammering. The room was dead silent. The TV screen now reflected only static, its faint electric hum filling the air. Alex stumbled back, knocking into a pile of tapes. His mind reeled. Had he imagined it? A trick of the old tape? But deep in his gut, he knew the truth. Something was wrong with that episode. Something was inside it. Shaking, Alex pulled out his phone. He needed answers. His fingers trembled as he searched online for any mention of a lost Barney and Friends episode. That's when he found the urban legend. A rumor had circulated for years, a supposed lost episode, aired only once before being pulled. Parents who claimed to have seen it reported their children waking up screaming, insisting that Barney had spoken to them directly through the screen. Some said the theme song, when played in reverse, contained a hidden message. He sees you. And then there was David Joyner, the man who played Barney for years. After leaving the show, he became a tantric healer, claiming to channel energies through spiritual touch. Some found it eccentric. Others found it unsettling. But hidden in obscure forums, some whispered a darker theory. Not about what Joyner did after Barney, but about what he did during. A few old posts, long buried, spoke of strange occurrences on set, of crew members reporting shadows where there shouldn't have been any, of cameras malfunctioning whenever Barney stood too still, of moments when the suit moved on its own. Alex swallowed hard, staring at the broken VHS in his hands. He had to destroy it. He had to. Then he heard it. A faint, crackling laugh. It came from the television, but the TV was unplugged. The laughter grew louder, rising in pitch, filling the room. And beneath it, a voice, low, hollow, smiling. "I love you," Alex screamed. "Some things should stay lost." I never should have played that tape. It started as nothing more than an innocent moment of nostalgia, a childhood memory clawing its way to the surface. But now I can't sleep without seeing those hollow eyes staring at me from the dark corners of my room. This is how it began. I was home for the summer, helping my mom clean out the attic. Our family had lived in the same house since I was a baby, and the attic was a graveyard of forgotten relics. Dust-covered furniture, yellowed newspapers, and boxes filled with the remnants of a life once lived. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and insulation, and every step kicked up clouds of dust that shimmered in the dim light filtering through the tiny cobweb-covered window. I was rummaging through a box of old VHS tapes when I saw it. A black tape, slightly larger than the others. Its surface was scuffed, the plastic casing worn and brittle. The label, a small strip of yellowed masking tape, had 3 words written in fading ink. Candle Cove, 1988. My fingers tightened around the tape. The moment I saw the name, something deep in my memory stirred. It was like an old, half-forgotten dream, familiar yet unreachable, buried beneath years of dust and time. Candle Cove. I whispered it aloud, testing the weight of the words in my mouth. It felt wrong. "Hey, Mom," I called, lifting the tape. "Do you remember this?" My mother glanced up from a box of old photographs, her brow furrowing at the sight of the tape in my hands. For a moment, just a flicker of a second, something flashed across her face, recognition, maybe even fear, but it was gone just as quickly. "No," she said firmly. "You must have picked that up from a garage sale or something." I frowned. "Are you sure? I swear I watched this as a kid." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I never let you watch weird old shows like that. It's probably junk. Just throw it out." Her voice was clipped, dismissive. But I knew my mother. She was lying. That night, long after my parents had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, the dim glow of the television casting long shadows against the walls. The tape sat in my lap, heavier than it should have been, as though the weight of something unseen pressed against it. My hands trembled as I slid it into the VCR. The machine whirred, the screen flickered, and Candle Cove began. At first it seemed like any other children's show from the 1980s. The opening sequence was simple. Grainy footage of a fog-covered ocean, the waves rolling gently against jagged rocks. The title appeared in shaky, flickering letters, Candle Cove. The image was washed out, the colors dull and lifeless. The background music was off-key, played on what sounded like a broken calliope, its notes warping in and out of tune. Then the puppets appeared. I recoiled instinctively. They weren't like the friendly, fuzzy puppets from Sesame Street. These were crude, human-like figures with stiff, jerky movements, their hollow, painted eyes never quite facing forward. Their heads tilted at unnatural angles, their mouths moving too slowly for their words. A voice, raspy, barely above a whisper, emerged from the static. "Welcome back, kids." A chill ran down my spine. The characters introduced themselves. Jawbone, the skeletal pirate, was the first. His rubbery, decayed skin clung loosely to his frame, his jaw clacking open and shut as though it were barely holding together. His voice was slow, deliberate. "Ahoy, mateys," he croaked. "Are you ready to sail to Candle Cove?" Next was Janie, a little girl puppet with tangled straw-like hair and a faded blue dress. Something about her face was off. Her painted-on features looked hastily done, and her eyes looked real, as if something was behind them, watching. Then, finally, came him, the skin taker. A tall, thin figure, draped in tattered, dark robes. His face was a pale mask, porcelain-like but cracked, revealing something dark and wet beneath. His black, beady eyes gleamed as his jagged yellowed teeth clacked together with every movement. "Would you like to sail with us?" His voice slithered into my ears like oil. I felt sick. The screen flickered. Suddenly, the ship was at sea, surrounded by thick, unnatural fog. The camera angles were wrong, too close, pressing in on the puppets' faces, their hollow eyes staring through the screen. Janie turned to the camera. "Do you remember the screaming episode?" she asked. My breath hitched. Yes, I did. The image skipped, frames missing, as if the film reel was coming undone. The puppets stood in a row, frozen, their mouths slightly open. The ocean behind them was no longer water. It was black, a void stretching into eternity. Then they screamed. All of them. Not playful, cartoonish shouts, but real, agonized screams. The kind that made your skin crawl. The kind that sounded too human. I slapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The shrieking grew louder, distorted, reverberating inside my skull. It didn't stop, it went on. I felt wrong, like I was being pulled into the screen. Then, the tape cut to static. I gasped for air, my ears ringing. My hands shook as I ejected the tape and shoved it under the coffee table. My head pounded, my thoughts spiraling. I had just seen it, hadn't I? I needed answers. I rushed to my computer, my fingers trembling as I candled Cove into the search bar. And I found them. People like me. People who remembered. Scattered across old forums were posts from others who had watched the show as children but could never find proof it existed. But the strangest part? Every single one of them had asked their parents about Candle Cove. And every single one got the same response. "You used to sit in front of the TV, staring at static. There was no show." My chest tightened. I turned back toward the television, my pulse hammering in my ears. The tape was gone. The VHS player sat empty. The tape, the one I had just watched, had disappeared. Then, from the television speakers, a faint, crackling whisper. "Welcome back, kids." The static flickered. Something moved in the reflection of the screen. And then, the television shut off. Thank you for watching this video by Sanctum Obscura. If you enjoyed unraveling the darkness with us, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay curious, stay brave, and remember, some mysteries are better left in the shadows. See you next time.